Oh, hey, look, it's Wednesday and there's more portal news. Never would have seen that coming, huh? More transfer portal news. Never would have guessed it, but sure enough, it happened yesterday. Another portal addition from Pitt, a portal, I guess from Pitt's perspective, it's a portal departure. It's an addition to the portal, a departure from Pitt's roster. It's Francis Brewu, the sophomore defensive tackle, entering the transfer portal. It was a long time coming, quite frankly, with Francis Brewu. I think this has been heading in this direction for quite some time. There have been people who've been predicting him going into the transfer portal basically since before he even signed as a recruit. Now it's finally come to fruition. The sophomore defensive tackle heading off somewhere else. We'll see where he ends up. But let's talk about the impact of losing Francis Brewu, what it means for the rest of Pitt's defensive line, and we're starting to see the other side of it. Not necessarily guys committing to Pitt from the portal, although I think that's gonna pick up as this week goes on. But players announcing that they're returning, because this is now part of it as well. If you're not staying, you're going. If you're not going, you're staying. And how are we to know? Well, you got to announce it. So are there like 110 locked in tweets coming from Pitt players who are returning to the roster? Maybe. Maybe not 110 or so, but there might be a lot, and we're going to be keeping an eye on those. So let's talk about who's announced that they're coming back and what this means for the roster and how things are sort of shaping up and coming together and piecing together, however you want to put it. So let's talk about Francis Brew's departure. Let's talk about the guys who are still here, the guys who intend to be on Pitt's roster in 2026. Here on the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, it's Wednesday on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com hanging out with you, taking a short break from texting and DMing and searching and following and calling and all the different things that we're doing to try to gather info on what's going on with Pitt and the transfer portal. The long and short of it is that they are trying to get a lot of guys, not necessarily, well, somewhat to replace some of the guys they've lost, and also to bring in guys that can fill out the roster, right? That's what you're trying to do right now. Fill in the holes, either holes, created by recruiting misses or created by players who are leaving for the transfer portal. But anyway, we're keeping an eye on all of that. We got all the updates at Panther-Lair.com, so make sure you check that out, Panther-Lair.com. Pitt side on the 24/7 Sports Network. Don't forget, we'll have the live Panther-Lair show tonight right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We'll get started at 8:30 p.m., so you can tune in for that. Me and Jim Hammett talking with you about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. We'll talk Pitt. We'll talk about the transfer portal. We'll talk about Pitt's roster, about the players they've lost and the players they've added and all of that. We'll talk about the basketball team and what's going on there, as the Panthers are in a week off here after losing to Miami last week, losing to Clemson last week, and then they'll have Syracuse at home on Saturday. So we'll talk a little basketball as well, and anything else you want to talk about. That's the fun of the live show. You can get in the chat screen, post your comments and questions. We can have a little back and forth. We enjoy it. And certainly we'll be talking about Francis Brewu, the sophomore defensive tackle who went into the transfer portal yesterday. And kind of like I said at the beginning, like, it's been a long time coming. I mean, this is a guy, I believe he committed in like the spring of his junior year, maybe the summer between his junior and senior year. But then when signing day was rolling around in December, before he signed, there was some moments of hesitation. I forget if it was Wisconsin or Michigan State. It might have been both. I think it might have been Michigan State. Making a late push for Francis Brewu, and at that point, NIL was a real thing, and it was a factor in recruiting, or it could be a factor in recruiting if schools chose to wield it. And there were some efforts made there. And, ultimately Pitt had to up its offer to Francis Brewu in order to keep him in the signing class. And they did, and that's good. And you got Francis Brewu, and now he's, part of the program, and he goes through his freshman year, and after his freshman year gets a raise. I'm pretty sure he got another one in the following spring. And then, you come around again. There might have been another one in there somewhere. And you come now to the end of his sophomore year, and, it's a situation where the system is such that you can repeatedly get raises, and at a certain point you hit a ceiling and hit a cap with how far you can go with guys, and Francis Brewu will look to reach that cap elsewhere. A good, talented young defensive tackle. I don't think there's any question about that. There's ongoing discussion and debate on the message boards about how good he was, the impact that he made. He did have 7 tackles for loss. I think it was the second most, tied for second most among defensive linemen last season at Pitt. Right behind Jimmy Scott, I think he had 8 tackles for loss. Francis Brewu and Isaiah Neal, I think, had 7 tackles for loss each. Francis Brewu had 1 sack. I think he was 5th or 4th on the team with 20 pressures, which is that's a lot. To be top 5 on the team in pressures as a defensive tackle, I mean, you're doing something right there. I think he might have been a little bit better against the run than he was as a pass rusher, but he was still getting into the backfield. He was still impacting things, and he was doing it as a sophomore. A guy who played as a true freshman and then played as a sophomore. Still a young player, still a lot of development to go, and there are obviously a lot of natural physical skills and tools. Guy who's crazy strong, really good athlete for somebody his size. But you just always felt, going back to before signing day when he was flirting with some other schools, you felt like not that it's necessarily a red flag, but this might be who he is, and you're not really sure how long he's going to be around. And that's what the system permits you to do. That's what the system allows, is annual free agency, right? We've been talking about it all week. We talked about it last week. We've been talking about it for 5 years. It's annual free agency, and that means you have to re-recruit your guys every year. And so in addition to going out and trying to find those pieces that you're going to add, trying to find those guys who can come in and join the roster and replace the players you lost, or supplement the players you have coming back, complement the players you have coming back, and fill in those holes. In addition to that, where you're scouring the transfer portal, which is full of like thousands of guys, you're also trying to put in the efforts to keep your current roster in place. And I think if you describe it to anyone, they would tell you that's insane. You had a funny, I forget where we were. I think it was on Sunday night. I was riding in the car with my family, and I forgot how we even got on the topic, but I started explaining the transfer portal, and this time of year in college football, and explaining some situations. And I use some like Pitt situations as examples. And when you take, if you really want to get a sense of how ridiculous this whole system is and how out of whack it is, explain it to someone who doesn't really have any context. Explain it to someone who hasn't really heard anything about it. Explain it to someone who would have no concept of it whatsoever, and run through the whole process of the negotiations and the renegotiations and the agents and the other offers, and you match the number, and now another school's got a number and you got to match that number, and can you match that number? Well, now you don't have to match that number. And explain it to anyone who doesn't really follow this stuff as closely as you and I do, and they'll be dumbfounded. They'll be like, "What are you talking about? That's insane. You can't do things like that. That's no way to operate any kind of system or structure." And that was my family's mirror. They were like, "Wait, what? You can what? Why would they be allowed to do that?" I'm like, "Oh, because nobody ever made any rules." You know why it's allowed to be this way? Because nobody ever made any rules. Because the NCAA wanted to pretend for the longest time that they wouldn't have to do this. They wouldn't have to do this. They wouldn't have to do this. And they allowed this, like a cancer, they allowed this system to grow unchecked. And now it's gotten to a point where it's going to be really, really hard, and you're going to need the government to get anything actually done here. Good luck with that. It's ridiculous. And so now, started getting some of these Instagram posts or tweets coming yesterday of locked in. Guys are locked in. These are the guys who are returning. Sean Fitzsimmons posted one yesterday. Keith Gouvet posted one yesterday. It's what Sean Lee posted on Monday when he announced he was coming back. Locked in. And it's clearly a graphic made by Pitt. And we started a thread on the message board at Panther-Lair.com. We'll have it pinned. We'll put all the guys there, and just keep it all in one place. Easy place, an easy resource, place to go look for it. But are there going to be 90 of these things, or 80 of these things, or 75? If there's 30, it's ridiculous. But why wouldn't there be? Because now it's a real question. Conceivably, I could sit here and send a direct message or a text message to every single player on the roster and say, "Hey, are you coming back next year?" And if they said yes, it would actually be something of a worthy headline. That's insane. No other sports league is like that. Nobody else has a system like that, because it's not actually a system. It's not a real. It's just completely unfettered and out of control. But this is what it is. And so now Sean Fitzsimmons is expected to post that. Keith Gouveia is expected to post that. These guys are expected to make their posts that they're coming back. Every year you have to find out what portion of your roster intends to return. Like, we didn't have the ideal system back in the day when it was, players had no compensation. I mean, the scholarship aside, no compensation for the massive amounts of money they were generating for the schools. That wasn't the right system. This sure as hell isn't either. But it's what we've got, and it's insane. But I don't need to go on this rant every day. I feel like I do. I probably have, and that's just the way it goes. It's insane. With these guys coming back, though, I think it is relevant to talk about them because, part of it, too, and we talk about this when guys commit. We talk about this when guys go into the transfer portal, and we can talk about it when guys announce that they're coming back, is we talk about the impact on the roster and what it looks like with those players departing, with those players being added, or with these players returning. So, along the defensive line, right? So you've got Francis Brewu going into the portal, and you've got Sean Fitzsimmons announcing that he's going to be back at Pitt for another year. So what does that do to the defensive tackle depth? I think it's, Fitzsimmons is good. I think Sean Fitzsimmons, when he's healthy, is a good player. I think Nick James is good. I think Jasir Whittington is going to be good. He's going to be a redshirt sophomore, I think, next season. And that he's going to be really good. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Isaiah Neal. I think that's going to be one of the big question marks going into 2026. If by chance we ever actually talk to the Pitt coaching staff between now and spring camp, that'll be one of the questions we would ask. Does Isaiah Neal stay at defensive end where he moved after they had the injury issues with Blaine Spires and Jaden Moore and Zach Crothers, and they were really kind of hurting at defensive end, and they had to move him outside? And I think it went pretty well when they moved him out there. I think he did well. I think he could do really well at defensive tackle too. But that's going to be a big question, is what do you do with Isaiah Neal? And maybe some of it depends on the other players that they get. And if they lose anybody else to the transfer portal, if they bring anybody else in, and maybe some of the health at, defensive end as well. Because if you've got if you go into next season, your defensive ends, some of your top guys, Jimmy Scott, Zach Crothers, Jaden Moore, I think you've got a pretty good foundation there. But you'd like, unless I'm forgetting someone, you'd like either one of the younger guys to step up or to keep Neal out there. But then at tackle, you've got Fitzsimmons, you've got Nick James, you've got Jasir Whittington. Maybe there you're looking for a Trevor Summers or somebody to step up and fill out that rotation a little bit. I've been encouraged about the defensive line in the last, I think it was last year. But that got a little bit complicated because, Blaine Spires got hurt. Jaden Moore missed most of the season. I don't think you really had the group that you expected to have out there. But you also got an emergence of Zach Crothers, who I think is big at defensive end. My point is, I don't want to go overboard with optimism about the defensive line. I think I'll be more wait and see this season. But I do like some of the pieces that they've got. I like Jaden Moore. I like what Zach Crothers showed. I think Jimmy Scott is a really solid defensive end. Doesn't always produce a lot in the way of sacks, but he definitely gets into the backfield and impacts the play that way. And then I do like these defensive tackles. Sean Fitzsimmons, Nick James, Jasir Whittington. I'd like it better with Francis Brewu in the mix. And then you throw Isaiah Neal in at either one of those spots, and I think you're going to get good production out of him. So there's good potential there. I think there's good experience there. I think there's good ability there. We just need to actually see them go out and do it. I still don't know if they run into that big time offensive line like they ran into against Notre Dame or against Miami. I'm still not sure how they'll hold up. But I do think in most games against most ACC competition, that group should be able to be pretty effective at stopping the run and also affect the passing game as well. On the other side, with Keith Gouveia coming back, we talked about this a little bit when we talked about Natino Olivieri coming in as a transfer. And we've hit on this point a few times, this idea of what the offensive line could look like. I think Olivieri, the transfer from Penn, steps in as the starting left tackle. And then you sort of sort out what you want to do with those other 4 spots. And I think they'll try to bring in another offensive line transfer. So we'll see what happens there. But in terms of returning guys, I mean, you have Gouveia, you have Ryan Coretta, B.J. Williams, all returning interior players. Ryan Baer returning right tackle, who could potentially step inside, slide inside and play guard. If they feel like Kendall Stanley gives them a good option outside at right tackle. And it might not necessarily be a case of Kendall Stanley being better than Ryan Baer at right tackle, but it might be a case of Baer being better at guard than tackle, which I think is possible. And that might even be where his future is. His future as if he has an opportunity in the NFL, he might have his best opportunity playing inside at guard rather than outside of tackle. So maybe this is the year to do it, to give him that opportunity to try to slide in. And if you do that, then you've got, Baer, you've got B.J. Williams, you got Keith Gouveia, you got Ryan Coretta, all for those 3 interior line spots, plus potentially bringing in a transfer as well. So we'll see what happens there. I could also see Baer staying outside. I just think it's an interesting idea to ponder and consider. And I think having Gouveia back gives them, I think he could be potentially the center, either him or Ryan Coretta, and if or play guard, which is where he played this past season before he got hurt in the Louisville game. So options there on the offensive line. That's probably going to be another position where I kind of wait and see. I was borderline bullish on the offensive line entering last season. I thought they had their moments, but obviously when they faced quality competition, they struggled mightily. And that's going to be an issue again this year, I think. I shouldn't say I think that'll be an issue. I think it's got the potential to be an issue again when they face some of those higher-end defensive lines. Now, maybe they'll face a bit fewer of those higher-end defensive lines, but I don't think there's any question, and anyone would disagree, that they need to take some steps forward. They need to be better in 2026 than they were in 2025. I think Keith Gouveia coming back helps that. I think bringing in Natino Olivieri helps that. As your left tackle, I think he can be and should be better than Jeff Percy was this past season. So maybe some upgrades happening there. I will be interested to see if they try to upgrade the defensive line. We've seen, there's a defensive lineman from Texas Tech visiting today, and so we'll see, if he ends up committing to Pitt and potentially, what impact that has. But I think there's more of a priority on adding on the offensive line, and with an eye to maybe trying to build it out a little bit on the defensive line. It's so important up front. I mean, we know this. You've got to be good up front, and Pitt really wasn't all that great. They really haven't been all that great over the last, up front over the last really 3 seasons, going back to 2022, I would say, when they had some pretty good offensive linemen. They had Kalijah Cansey on the D-line. I don't think they've been all that great on either side of the ball up front for the last 3 years. How much better can they get in 2026? That'll probably depend on the guys they bring in. And development of some younger players too, because they do have some younger offensive linemen. Some of those defensive linemen that we talked about are younger guys too. So there's potential there, but I don't know. Not all that bullish. But that's the news. Francis Brewu going to the transfer portal. Sean Fitzsimmons, Keith Gouveia both coming back. We'll see who adds to that list. Any of those lists. Guys leaving, guys staying, guys coming in. See who has that list today. We'll talk about tonight on the live show at 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And then we'll break it all down again for you tomorrow on the Morning Pit. Maybe get a little bit of hoops talk as well. We'll do it all right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our Pit video content. And check out the website Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for watching today. Hope you've had a great week so far. Enjoy your Wednesday, and we'll catch up with you tonight for the live show and tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.